Hi, so this is a really basic FL Studio tutorial. I'm kind of just going to go around in FL Studio, show how everything works, and then kind of go over how I start doing a track. So I think you should download FL Studio first and kind of play around with it. After you do that, watch this tutorial. I also recommend downloading some sample packs and also learning some basic music theory, so chords, scales, maybe even melody stuff, but specifically how to write something in the same key. If you don't know how to do that, please go watch a tutorial. It just makes things so much easier and you will actually get so much better at music production. So let's start out. So this is I'm going to be going a little fast, so feel free to watch this slow or pause it or things like that. It's meant to be something you can come back to. So this is FL Studio. Mine has kind of a darker theme to it, which is just how I like it, but it doesn't look too different from the default, so hopefully yours looks similar to this. So this right here is the playlist. This is how you organize all of your songs, specifically through patterns. So you can write, say, a piano melody and save the pattern and actually place it within the playlist in a specific arrangement. So you can have it early in the song and late in the song, the entire duration of the song, things like that. Kind of like little building blocks in a way. But I'll go over that more later. There's also a lot of things where you can like disable playlist clips and things like that. That's pretty consistent through the whole application. So for instance, this is the channel rack. This is where all of your instruments or a lot of times samples will be. So if you want to say like add a piano or add percussion, you'll put it in here, and I'll go over that more later. And here is the mixer rack. So each one of these will most likely have an instrument or something else go through it. And you can edit everything from the volume to adding effects like reverb, EQ, things like that. This will be used a lot more later on in your music production career, less so at the beginning. You can use it to add something like, say, distortion or EQ it, but if you want to do advanced mixing, you're probably going to be doing music for a while before you actually get more into that. Although it is important, but it's something that if you forget, it's totally fine. Most songs you're making at first are going to be super simple, so they don't need a lot of mixing done with them. Although I do recommend looking more into that as you keep doing music if you want really clean sounding music, especially if you do vocals, but that's something I'm not going to touch on today. So the other thing with FL is there's a lot of junk that you don't need to pay attention to. There's a lot of these buttons up here. There's like a timer, things like that. There's the BPM and things like that. What I recommend doing is for your first few projects, probably keep the BPM. You can adjust it up here to anywhere from, say, 120 to 150. I wouldn't go much faster than that. Some people like making music even slower than that, but I think something like 130 is just a very good default BPM to start with. And if you want to make something like ambient music, you can do it slower. If you want to do something faster like hyperpop or some EDM, you can make it faster. Just don't make it too fast, because fast adds energy, but it can also be a little bit more difficult to actually produce for. So anyways, and this is your sample library. So yours might look a little different, but what you can do is you can actually go into the settings and add your samples. So I have a ton of samples here that I use. I would recommend downloading some sample packs and download a few different ones. Download, say, like an EDM pack, and then some like live drums, things like that. You want to have a good selection. You don't want to have too many. I recommend starting out with, say, maybe 3. And mainly just for drums. You do not want to actually make your own drums, because you can, but you might as well just use someone else's until you actually get to the point that you know how to make songs first. Using other people's property, should I say, whether that's sample packs or sampling actual full songs, is more than okay just in general, but especially when you're starting out. So steal a melody from a show you like, or I mean a song or something like that. You just might as well, right? So I'm going to actually start by showing off the piano roll. So if you go over here to the channel rack, you can add an instrument. What I recommend using is the Labs piano. It's used in a ton of music production nowadays. If not this, you can follow along with any other piano. FL Keys is the default one, but it doesn't sound that great. But I'm just going to use Labs. and it's completely free. So this window pops up. I usually just keep it wherever. And the other thing is, I would highly recommend learning keyboard shortcuts. You can switch between all the windows by pressing these buttons up here, and on the left side it actually shows what those windows are going to be. But using keyboard shortcuts means you can actually move alongside everything very fast with ease, and that will speed up your production a ton. And don't forget, doing things faster just will simply make your music better because you'll have more time to actually spend making the song and not figuring out how to close out your windows and things like that. That's one of the number one things I've learned in my couple years doing music. So once we have labs, I recommend downloading the piano packs. So there's soft piano. Everyone really likes that one. I personally really like felt cassette. So if we go here, I'm turning up the velocity a little, and then I'm going to go to the reverb and turn it up, and then the volume. You don't have to do any of these things. This is just going to make it sound louder, and I like hearing how things sound. You could also start off with a different synth, but I recommend a piano just because it's probably just the most pure sound for hearing chords. If you start out by writing a melody or a bass line, you can totally do that, but having chords set up your entire project. So you can write a melody in key, you can write a bass line in key because you know what the scale is. So let's go here, and this is the piano roll. This is where all of your notes will be put down. This I always just keep floating around in the middle. That's why you need to know those keyboard shortcuts. You can also disable it just by clicking that. So right click, piano roll, things like that. It just speeds it up if you know what you're doing. So you can zoom out with Control or Command, scroll out, scroll in. So let's put down some notes. So these are your note blocks. They might look a bit different because of the theming, but you can stretch them out or make them shorter. If we keep it to just here, so there's a couple C notes. So if you press spacebar, you can actually hear it. There's also the velocity that you can control down here. That's just how loud it is. I don't really recommend toying with all of these things. That's kind of a later thing. You can also edit, say, the note pan. So one's like in your left ear, the next one is in your right ear. Again, that's just stuff that you probably just don't even need to look into if you're starting out. So let's actually write some chords. I'll do something in C minor, super basic chord. A lot of like sad pop songs use it, but it's just easy to understand. So we have C. And I'm actually going to do this. So, and I'm doing whole, half, whole, half, whole. And then let's go down here. So whole, half, whole, half. And I have automatic scale highlighting on. You can turn that on by going here to the arrow. And then it should be view, and then somewhere down here of I believe it should be note highlighting, scale highlighting. There you go. And I have automatic. That's probably going to be set on automatically, but I just recommend having that. Now with these notes, you can drag them around, do whatever. You can also, if you hold Command, if you're on a Mac, or Control on Windows, you can do drag selecting. This becomes really important because if you say kind of like this, so if you press this button, and whenever you write music, I kind of just start throwing down chords and seeing what I like. You might write the first note or the first chord and want to write something completely different for the second, and keep writing them onwards and onwards. For this tutorial, I'm just going to keep it to this, but definitely take more time than I am to actually go into this. So a cool trick that I was shown is if you hold Command A or Control A, it highlights all of them. So it highlights it up to here because the notes are highlighted there. And if you do Control or Command B, it copies it over. You can also do this with, say, like this. It's just the selection it copies over. So if you have this whole thing selected and you only want to copy this over and you do Control B, it'll move it over here. It'll be kind of awkward looking. So just make sure not to do that. You can press delete, the delete key, to delete all these. So I'm just going to copy these over. I'm going to do Control B, which copies that specific over. It always copies to the end of whatever this is. So if you have it here and you do just selecting these, if you do Control B, it'll copy it like that. So just avoid that if that's not what you're trying to do. But anyways, okay, it stopped recording for a second, but let's get back into it. So something I like doing when writing my chords is kind of spreading them out a little bit. That's probably the best way to take some simple chords and actually make them feel a lot more lush. So if you're listening to them now, they sound good, but this clearly isn't just a song, essentially. You need a lot more. So let's select them. So you can do Command or Control and highlight. You can also select some and then do Command Control Shift to select more, like that. And then do Command or Control up or down to move the notes an octave. So if we move them an octave up, it'll sound like this. So that sounds pretty good. I think we could add a little bit more variation. So let's move this one up an octave and see how that sounds. Awesome. Okay. So these are pretty basic, but they sound good, I would like to say at least. So let's add another labs instance back at the channel rack over here. And so let's add a soft piano. This is the one that a lot of people use. I don't recommend turning this knob up too much because you start hearing the clicks of the piano. So let's just do like 20, 30 or so and add some reverb, add volume, and then let's just pan it to the left a little bit just so it kind of fleshes out the sound more. It's like a complementing thing. So we're still on the piano roll for the original Labs piano. But if we go over here and right click this, you can select that. There is a shortcut to switch between that, but we'll learn about that later. So you can copy paste these notes actually and just paste them into here. Make sure they're lined up. So if we mute the original piano, here's the new piano. Sounds a little different. Here's the original. Yeah. So if we play them together, so it sounds a lot more full. And we can actually take all these and move them, say, an octave up, so it sounds even like this. You could even add a complementary note, like right here. There you go. So there's some extra notes. I'm actually going to highlight all of these. And down in the velocity, I'm actually going to turn it down. Just keeping them like that. So they're a little more quiet. There's more you can do with velocity. For instance, you can highlight everything and randomize. That's Alt-R on Mac at least. I'm not sure about Windows. And change the velocity so it's randomized, kind of like it's a real piano. You don't have to do that though, and that kind of adds some more complication. And the difference isn't super insane. You can also do different automation things if you're on FL21, but again, that is a lot more complicated, but just introducing the idea so you can know about it later. Something that probably won't affect your music production, but is good to know once you get into more advanced parts of it. So we have that. So let's write a really simple melody. I'm going to go back to piano, adding another Labs piano up here. And I'm going to select maybe sliced upright piano. Again, it doesn't really matter too much, but might as well just go with the piano. So see how we have all the chords here. So let's just play this and see how this sounds. I'm just kind of doing some random stuff and seeing how it sounds. Okay, that sounds pretty all right. I'm going to copy that over and do the same type of melody but for that. So my number one recommendation for melodies is making them as simple as you can. So notice how these pretty much only move one note up or down, maybe two at one point, and they follow the chords. So the reason you should do this is a lot of people want to write really complex, crazy melodies, but think of most songs. They all have very simple melodies. It's usually the rhythm that gets more creative. and it becomes catchy and you can memorize it. If you write a melody, most people when they start writing out melodies will write crazy stuff. They will start writing like something that looks more like this or something. Okay, that actually sounds good. That's my bad. I might actually keep that in. I like that. But my point with all this, as I'm kind of disproving that instance, but this is still fairly simple. A lot of people will write things that go all over the place and sound really, really, really crazy. The more complex your melody is, the less people are going to remember it. So as long as you can kind of sing the melody, like... See, that gets even a little more complicated with this specifically, but the like dun 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 dun, whatever. That could be catchy. I think having a note repeat, so you could go like dun 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 or like whatever, I don't know, something insane, but it's almost more catchy to just do like a dun 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 dun. I don't know, something like that. Play around with it. I recommend writing a melody and playing it all together. A lot of beginners, when they start out, they start writing their chords and then their melody separately. That sounds okay. I almost prefer this one, but let's just keep that in there for the sake of it. My thing is, if you write a really good melody and you put it over the chords, it might not sound good. So always what I like doing, as you saw, is just writing the melody while playing everything. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty all right. I don't know if I like this piano a ton, but it is complimentary, so I'll take that. And I'll move that to the right a little bit so it sticks out a little more. Okay, so next let's add a bass, and I'm just going to do that in labs with another piano. Usually you're going to want to do this with an 808 or a respace or with Serum or something like that, but I need to catch my breath. Fuck. Okay, I'm good now. Okay. Most EDM producers will use Serum for basses or, dubstep basses, things like that. We can touch on that in a sec. So, opening up a piano, let's just do... I'll do another felt cassette, because that one I think just sounds kind of the cleanest, so turning these up a bit. So opening this, you can see all the ghost notes from the other notes, as you could probably see before. We just need to add some really bassy notes. So I'm going to take these that were in the last chords. I'm going to make sure the velocity is a bit medium high. So I'm going to highlight them and do the command or control down arrow. And let's see just by itself for a second. Okay. So that's pretty low. We can get a little lower, but let's just keep it at this. And then let's play it all together. So that by itself sounds pretty great, actually. If we want, we can add a little more variety to it. So let's do like this, maybe. Yeah, that adds a lot more variety to it. And I think I could even just do another one of those there. So if you're writing dance music, this is usually fairly different. But just for like an intro thing, I think this works. Something else I recommend is if you're writing longer songs, make them have a kind of intro that's, say, just piano or with softer sounds. And if it goes into more of a drop with percussion, you might want to actually do something that's a little more synth heavy. So it actually has a legit bass and everything like that. But so let's just play this all together one more time. Okay, so that's a pretty full sound. Honestly, you could add some percussion to this, and you'd have an actual song. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do percussion now, and then we can go a bit more into Actually, I'll start writing some synths. So here's the pattern view. So this isn't colored or anything, but just the black and white coloring. But we can actually lay this down and play it. So it plays the piano roll and the channel rack and everything, but just focusing on the pattern here. You can also extend this if you need to see it better. You can also take the patterns and cut off parts of them. You can use the paintbrush tool, which is what I have, to continuously draw the pattern. So if you do that, you can just keep drawing it. The pencil is just for clicking it down. It doesn't drag or anything. And there's a few other things that you can do. This is more for samples is what I use it for, but just like going through the pattern if you only want to move parts of it. There's also a cut tool, so you can actually slice these if needed. That can be useful sometimes, but so let's actually make this and do more of a drop type thing. So I'm actually going to make a new pattern. So up here, this is something you're going to be using a lot. See the pattern 1? So if we press the plus, we can add one. So let's call this synth 1 and color it. I recommend coloring the playlist inserts because it's a lot easier to tell what they are on here. So press the check. Okay, so now we're here. And then I'm going to use Vital for this. It is a free synth, completely free. It's similar to Serum, but Serum is a like a $200 cost. So let's just do this. So this is probably going to look like a lot when you first open Vital if you've ever used it. But let's just copy our notes over without doing anything. I'm going to copy these chords over. So going back to pattern, make sure you're on the second pattern. Opening up piano roll, copy pasting them. So when you play it, it's going to sound like this. Yeah, it's just a super harsh saw wave. So you can kind of ignore most of this. This is kind of a separate tutorial. I recommend looking up a Vital tutorial, but a lot of times my eyes just glaze over when I watch those when I started out. So I recommend downloading presets. It comes with a few presets. They're decent, but there's probably only like 5 max I would actually use from the ones you download. So I have a whole bunch I downloaded. But so you can follow along with this. I would do some sound design, but I think it's a little too much. So let's actually start with, say, a pad. That sounds good. Let's just see how this one sounds. That's pretty good. I'm actually going to turn the attack up on that. Okay, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm actually also going to add another actual piano. That sounds pretty cool. You can also chop this if you want to add some more things that you can do easily. So on Mac, it's Alt-U, but you can also go up here to the wrench and select chop and change how chopped you want it to be. That sounds pretty okay, but let's actually do an ARP. You can do that also in here with the ARP button. That sounds a little better. I can't say I like the piano paired with that pad though, so I'm actually going to cut these keys and add another Vital instance. And I'm going to go to the keys, see my favorites. I just have a ton of random ones. Let's check this one. That sounds pretty cool. And also, all of these presets I believe I downloaded, I think on some Reddit share packs. I don't have the links to the specific ones. You don't actually have to use this specifically, but choose a sound as an exercise that you might like. So we can also see if we want to move this an octave up. I kind of like it down. This is also a bit loud, so I'm actually going to go into Vital itself and turn this down. Awesome. And you want to make sure all the audio is balanced, and I'll show how mixing should work, but just for the meantime, because the pianos are usually mixed well enough, I'm going to put these mixers on a specific track. Now, there's ways you can organize this, but I'm actually just going to do the simplest thing and put this one on 1. You do that just by dragging up and down here. So 1 and then 2. You can also label these. So if you do pad 1, for instance, there you go. I don't usually label the mixer tracks unless it's something really important like a kick or something like that, and it's a project I actually want to keep doing. If it's a demo, it doesn't really matter, because if you spend 10 minutes organizing your project every time, that's 10 minutes you could spend making the song better. That being said, spend a couple minutes organizing if possible, but you can also make templates that have all of these pre-made, so you can just add something to a mixer track. So if you take this and turn it down, for instance, now the pad's quieter versus now it's louder. Now, I recommend doing a lot of the mixing in something like Vital itself, so turning this down if it's too loud or turning it up. But there's a lot you can do with these mixing tracks, and these are more for the effects. So the ARP sounds pretty good, but I don't want it to have any low end because I don't want it to go against the bass. So there's a couple ways to do this, but the number one best way to do it is to go to one of these slots. And I usually, if it's an EQ, I usually do it in one of the bottom ones. Yes, the order does matter. So if you do reverb and then EQ it, it'll also EQ that reverb, if that makes any sort of sense. But I usually recommend kind of experimenting with that and how things sound. But so I'm just going to go to 8, and then I'm going to add Fruity Parametric EQ2. That's the FL Studio main EQ that you'll be using. And so you have this. This is almost certainly your most important plugin that you'll be using, aside from, I don't know, just really cool effects plugins. So if we play just the ARP, here's what this looks like. So this is actually pretty well mixed, surprisingly. It doesn't have any low end, and so how this works, everything is labeled up here, but this side is the low end, this is the high end, and these are the mids. And you have these little dot things that you can actually change. So let's say I really want a really harsh high end for some reason. See how it becomes a lot more clear there versus now it's really quiet. And what I recommend doing is experimenting. Take a sound you like and literally just go like this. You can also take songs that you like and do this too with them. You kind of learn how, like, what parts of the track exist where. What does the bass sound like? What do the highs sound like? What do the mids sound like? What happens if you just take out the bass? What does it sound like? So I like where this is, but just to ensure that there's no low end, and again, there really isn't much, but this is just a good way to actually start practicing this. I usually take the last knob here and right click it, and then change the type to a high pass. That basically cuts out all of the low end. A low pass does the opposite. And there's a few other options, but you don't have to know the general hertz here, but I would just say anything below around 120 is a bass, and then anything above, say, 7K is that really harsh high end. So for something like this, I would recommend cutting it. If you want to be really safe, let's say 150 to 200. That's just if you want a really, really clean mix. You don't want any of this to go into the low end. You can also change the steepness of this. I recommend looking more into how EQs work, but I recommend only keeping the steepness at the default, because if you make everything way too steep, you'll have phase issues, and it becomes a lot less full sounding sometimes if you don't have a ton of tracks. So that doesn't really change the sound of this that much, but that'll keep it cleaned up, and if we use anything else on this mixer track, we will keep the low end out. So let's go ahead and add a bass, and I'm actually going to use a similar technique to before. So I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm actually just going to keep this how it is. And so let's go here, and it's going to be a really harsh noise sound, but let's keep it that and then make it really low. So that sounds pretty good. I'm going to lower the attack a bit so it goes. And then I'm going to change this to a sine wave. Okay, I'm taking the attack back. I'm also going to add a little bit of EQ. This just cuts out some of that high end. And then I'm going to add a compressor. This is a whole nother thing that you really don't need to focus on, but you can just copy what I'm doing here. I'm just basically compressing the low end so it hits harder and then taking down the high end a bit. And then I'll add a little bit of distortion. Cool. I'm going to keep this really simple. However, I will copy over that melody from before. And I'm just going to open another Vital instance. And then I'll choose some keys that I like. So I think those sounds work fine enough together. Let's put this on mixer track 3, and just for or actually I'm gonna do 4 and then the bass on 3. The bass, what I recommend doing is compressing it. That basically means that whenever the bass starts out, it's kind of quiet. You want to boost that so it's all very consistent. That's kind of a whole nother tutorial beyond this, but I'm gonna add Fruity Limiter, and so if I play the bass, it's actually very compressed because of what I added to it. But if I add another bass on here, I want it to sound very similar and a similar level. So if you go to the actual limit part of this, this ceiling is how loud something can get. So if I compress that down, it'll become quieter. But let's keep that around here and then turn the gain up a ton. So the track is pretty quiet, so I'm actually turning that down so it's consistent with the rest of the track. That sounds pretty alright. So keeping it at that, I'm going to go to the 4th mixer track. And I'm going to do the same exact thing with the EQ. So I'm just going to do the high pass, and then I'm going to drag it up even a little further because it's such a lead melody. I'll do around 350. That's a little much, but if you want a really clean mix, I would recommend almost anything you add that isn't a bass. I would cut it out around, say, 100, 120 with something like this. But if you have something that's really high pitched, you might as well just push it up a little bit more. That's so if you say add vocals later, it doesn't interfere with the vocals, which are often around the 300 to 800 hertz range or so. Awesome, so that sounds pretty cool. So let's add some percussion here. So I'm going to put the synths here. So the transition sounds like this. So that doesn't really have any big transition, and I think that's kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial. But just making a loop here, I'm going to make a new pattern called drum. I always make my drums yellow, and then I'm going to find a really basic producer pack, because there's, say, like trap producer packs and things like that. Those are usually just really simple. Actually, I'm gonna go with, there's a splice pack that I believe you can pretty much find it on Reddit or anything. That is the Oliver Power Tools sample pack. This one just has some really good drums, specifically kicks, I would say. So let's go to the one shots in here, and then I'll do a clean kick. So let's just use this one because it's pretty simple. So you drag it in here so you can see that line. There you go. There's the kick. And let's actually start putting these down. So these dots are percussion hits. So if I add one there, then this is the 4-bar loop essentially. So if we just play this, sounds like that. You can shortcut this a bit more by right-clicking here and then say fill each 4 steps. That makes a 4 on the floor kick pattern. You can also get more creative with it. But so let's add a clap. Something like this, pretty simple. So I'll add this as a complement there, so sound like this. Pretty simple, but so let's make it a little more interesting, just adding some things here. Okay, that sounds a lot more interesting. So let's add some hi-hats. So let's do some electronic ones. That sounds pretty alright. So with hi-hats, a lot of the time, if you can kind of go crazy with them, but if you right-click this and then do fill every 4 steps, let's see how that sounds. See, that's a really good consistent pattern. And if you want to do something even crazier, if you right click here, you can actually go into the piano roll with this and say right here, let's add a couple more and let's add some higher pitched ones. See, that sounds pretty cool. I'm going to take out these actually. A lot of producers use this so they can add some nice flair to the hi-hats. Cool. Pretty simple. I don't want to make it too complex, but that's just a good way of looking at it. So for the most part, adding hi-hats to a mixer track isn't always really that necessary. But sometimes I do that just to make the mix really tight. Something I do recommend doing is putting the kick on a mixer track. So let's do 5, and let's name this kick. And I'm going to color it just in case. The reason you want to do that is because I believe this is our bass. Yes. So I'm going to name 3 bass. And we can reorganize this by, I believe it's, yes, Alt, and then one of the arrow keys. So I'm just going to put the bass to the right of the kick just for organization purposes. Really does not matter. So if you play these together, it'll sound like this. And it's hard to hear because the kick is actually pretty well mixed, but the kick interferes with the frequency of the bass. And this is something called side chaining that we have to do. It's very, very, very important. You really don't have to do it when starting out, but I do recommend it. And I'm keeping it in this tutorial just so you can come back and do this. There's a few different ways to do it, but the most simple, with a huge asterisk because it's not that simple, is using Fruity Peak controller. So I'm going to show how to do that. So have kick and bass next to each other. So go to somewhere on the kick. It doesn't really matter which effects track, but I usually do one of the later ones. Click here and then do the, what is it called? The peak controller. There we go. So this, open that and you'll see this and you'll be like, what the heck does this mean? You can just ignore almost all of this except the bass. I recommend taking the bass and turning it to probably about that. And then you can ignore the rest of this. Now close this, go to the bass, and this is the complex part. Go to the bass, right click on this slider right here, select link to controller, and then you have this. This is the hard part. Go to internal controller and click peak control peak, and then under mapping formula on this right here, click this and then click inverted and click accept. That is all you have to do, but it's something you just have to get used to. So let's play the bass and kick again. So I'm going to go back to peak controller, and this basically shows you a map of what your kick is doing. So this is the bass volume inverted. It's essentially taking the volume and turning it down when the kick hits. It's not hitting that hard, so I'm going to turn this volume that way. And that kick is pretty damn loud anyways, so it works. But you can hear that bass turn down a bit. That'll just make your mixes way cleaner. It'll just work a lot better. So I'm gonna control B that over here. So here's that all together. Definitely something you need to be doing if you're, that I have not been doing, is make the percussion on top of the instruments. But let's just play it all together. So that sounds pretty cool. If you go over here and if you ever click any of the samples, it comes up with this. You can pretty much ignore everything on here, but I do recommend looking at the volume so you can turn down the hi-hat if it's too loud. I'll turn it down just a little. And you can mess with the panning. So I actually like taking my hi-hats and panning them to the right a little bit. They just sound a lot clearer. And if you pan something to the right or left, you can usually turn the volume down a little bit so it's just cleaner in the mix, because a lot of the percussion is center. Specifically, always have the kick be center. I highly recommend keeping the kick center. Same with usually the clap, but that's a whole nother thing we could talk about. So that's the main essence of our song. I recommend sometimes taking the drum and separating the hi-hat. So let's say we take this and cut the hi-hat and then make a new track just called hi-hat. I'm going to color it a little differently so we can tell it's different. and then just paste those notes onto there. So what we could do is have it so it starts out with a hi-hat on this track. So it sounds like this. That kind of adds a bit of lead in. So if I skip to here. So I might actually even take out the hi-hats here. So it gives you something to add. I think that sounds pretty cool. And then the best way to actually build a type of lead up on here sometimes is to repeat notes. So if we cut this right here and then make it small and then make it repeat, let's just say, I'm going to use Control B. So this is the same pattern but repeated. Let's see how that sounds. So it definitely isn't perfect, but I think it's a decent jumping off point. It adds tension to this. We could even select this and then use this arrow thing to go to the end of that, so it repeats the last part of it. That actually sounds kind of off, so I'm actually going to just put it back to where it is. And that's the whole part of music, is kind of learning what works and learning what doesn't. So what I recommend adding here too is, say, a crash or something. So let's add that here. Let's make it really quiet because this is really loud, and then let's pan it to, say, the left a little bit. And that actually makes it sound a lot better. You can add risers and things like that. This is like a built-in riser here. And you don't have to use a sample pack. You can use a ton of really just anything you want, even the default drums. But let's say I want to add a riser, and I'm going to put this crash here. And if I double click it, it opens this menu that you've probably been seeing. And let's reverse it with this button right here. And let's line this up so it actually works as a riser. So it has a bit of a tail here, and you can hold Alt and then do that so it's not locked to this grid. So let's see how that sounds. I'm going to turn it down a little bit too, but it acts as a riser. Let's go. Sounds really cool. And you can tell that that makes the transition work a little better. It's not a fix-all, but I think adding a couple of the risers and the crashes, or impacts they're called, will make things sound a lot better. And sometimes they're like tempo based or something like that. That's like a whole nother process with it. But if you have really fast music, especially having these risers and everything, will just make things sound a lot better. It'll add a lot of tension. Just don't rely on them too much. Sometimes having, say, a note repeat is a lot more effective in building tension than just a riser. Because if you have two sections that are completely different, like I kind of do, the riser doesn't fully fix it. It just helps. So I recommend looking into that more. The other thing is you can actually build these sample patterns specifically in the playlist. So if I have a hi-hat that I like, I can just put it here and say stretch that, and then like make it repeat like that. With that, you're able to copy paste them. This just adds a lot more variability. So like that. It's a little too loud, but you get the point. The one issue with that I don't like is it's not in a pattern, so you can't just easily paste it wherever you want. That being said, it adds a lot more variability, so you can have like sound effects or things like that, producer tag, stuff like that. And so this song is only 30 seconds essentially, but usually I recommend repeating each section a bit longer. So I would actually have something more like this, and maybe taking out the hi-hat here. So if you had a vocal over this sounds a bit boring by itself, but if you put a vocal over it, it would sound a lot better. Again, that's a whole nother can of worms. But this is a fairly quickly made, competent enough beat without using any really advanced sounds. You can add a lot of effects to all of these things to make them sound even better, a lot more unique, a lot more crazy. And that's what I recommend doing when you are actually starting out with music, experiment a lot. Do as much as you can to make something unique, because if you can't make something unique, then why are you making music, should I say? Obviously, that's going to be different when you're starting out, but I recommend trying to find some creative workflow that works best. Don't just make a simple type beat every single time you make music. There's a lot that you can actually go into. That gets a lot crazier. I recommend downloading something like Portal, like a plugin, and adding it to your effects. So you have, say, this pod. But if I add something like Portal here, and then let's say I add like this, or maybe, I don't know, something like this. Sounds insane. Might not make the sound that much better, but it sounds really cool. So just experiment with things like that. There's so much to be done with this. And also, if you command or control click something, you can isolate it so it plays it by itself. Forgot to mention that. And you can also mix the sound in here, of course, like I was talking about. So I think that's pretty much it. That is how I start making music. I could do a project breakdown in the future or something like that, but hopefully this is very helpful if you're starting out. I recommend trying to follow along with this video if you can. But see if you can make anything that you're actually proud of. And I recommend not spending more than, let's say, a couple hours on a track. If you get to a point where you're with a track where you don't really know what you're adding or kind of just tweaking things endlessly, which is what I usually do, I highly recommend just making more tracks. Genuinely, when you start out, quantity is a little better than quality. You're not going to make the best track ever, even if you spend a month on it. But if you work for a month and then make a new track, it's probably going to be better than the one you made last month. Things like that. That obviously depends when you keep working on music for a very long time. But when I started out, 6 months after I was making music, I was making things that were minimum 5 times better than when I started out. And that just keeps compounding. So always make sure to start new projects. I recommend setting deadlines. That is really helpful. And trying to make a project, let's say every week or so. I used to do a project every day. That's obviously not doable for most people, but I do recommend doing something like that. And then, yeah, trying doing vocals. That's a whole nother tutorial that you'd have to look up. But just kind of keep experimenting and see what you can make. But yeah, best of luck.